Hi, it's Goddess Cecilia, and welcome to Dive Deeper. This month, we're going to explore the idea that sex ed starts a lot younger than most people would like to think that it does. In this current moment in time, there has been a lot of misinformation about what sex ed, what comprehensive, affirming sex ed can do in terms of preventing abuse. A lot of this misinformation is claiming that sex ed, anyone that is not cis or heterosexual, is quote unquote grooming children in order to be abused. It really couldn't be farther from the truth. There have been many studies that have shown that comprehensive affirming sex ed, sexual health education helps youth and eventually adults have more fulfilling, healthy, and safe lives. But what does sex ed look like for a young child? Oh, are sex educators exposing youth to sexual acts? No. If your definition of sex education revolves around sexual acts, then perhaps you also need a refresher on human sexuality. There's really more to sex ed than that, and realistically, sex ed for youth is also sex ed for adults. Now, I'd like to argue that sex ed actually begins at infancy. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's like some curriculum out there for infants. There isn't. Everybody calm down. Sexual health education includes conversations about boundaries, basic body parts, and healthy behaviors. At infancy, a baby has so many basic needs that their parents or primary caregivers have to take care of that the focus is really more so on the kind of care that the primary caregivers or the parents are able to provide for that infant. So what actually happens is that those caring adults have to become really familiar and comfortable with the basic medical terminology for body parts and use it consistently. Like it's head, shoulders, vulva or penis, anus, knees, and toes. So often we skip over this whole swath of the body, but this is literally our core, and we leave so much of this information out for youth, and so much of their emotions and their feelings are right here. They feel it in their bodies. And so to ignore such a huge part of who they are is really a disservice to them and can potentially set them up to not have the kind of language to talk about what doesn't feel good for them or what might feel harmful for them. Another thing that primary caregivers have to practice are the type of boundaries that they're setting for their child. That means who is allowed to hold them, who is allowed to touch them, who is allowed to interact with them, and how. For example, providing options as opposed to requesting that your child has to hug every single adult in their vicinity in order to be respectful in some sort of way. That might not actually be respecting that child's bodily autonomy. It's also up to the parents and the primary caregivers to decide how much exposure they're going to get to social media, to the television, and to just media in general. It's really crucial to practice this as the adults, as the primary caregivers. It truly becomes a foundation for that child to be able to utilize that language for themselves and to be an example for others. That's not to say that they're going to pick it up right away, right? Like toddlers, I can tell you, have so many needs and they're not always good about articulating them. That doesn't mean that they're not learning and that they're not hearing how you are talking about your body, how you're talking about their body, and how people get to interact with your and their bodies. What you might find during this process of learning for yourselves and for your child is who among the adults can be safe and trustworthy. And this might be difficult because it might mean that you're going to have to set very hard boundaries for folks who might not understand because of their generation or their culture. But you as a parent get to help set those boundaries with your child. And if we're truly invested in the safety and the well-being of future generations, then we as the adults, whether or not you are the parent or primary caregiver or another caring adult in a child's life, have to change our behaviors and expectations. And when we learn better, we do better. If you're interested in learning more about being a sex-positive caregiver or caring adult, check out Dr. Lex Brown James on Instagram and TikTok, and also check out the sexpositivefamilies.com website. They have so many resources available to you, and there's a lot of great folks out there doing great work for parents, caregivers, and the kids. If you want to continue the conversation about being a caring adult to a child, head on over to GoddessCecilia.com and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at GoddessCecilia.